My name is Claudia Wenger. I'm a special ed teacher. I'm also a behavior analyst, and I have developed and managed adult programs. I'm here in California. They were state-funded adult programs. And just to note, state-funded programs are funded by federal money, which means that most states, really all states have these federal funded programs. The names are different, but the services tend to be very similar because they are mandated federally. How robust they are does depend on the state, because some states put more money, more effort, and have a better system overall. But in any case, state agencies do have very similar programs. My agency's name is Claudia Cares Consulting, and I really focus on what is called secondary transition, which refers to the movement from high school to adulthood. I do go beyond adulthood because often I find people arrive, let's say, in adult world and still need support, but that is my focus. And I'll go ahead and get started. Okay, so the first question is, what is secondary transition? And I think to really answer this question properly, the real question first that we have to answer is, what is the first transition? So the first transition occurs when a child who's been receiving state agency funded services. Now, many of you have received it if your child was identified prior to 3 years old. Early intervention, it comes under different titles in different places. But when your child turns 3 years old, and then if they need to continue receiving support, most of those services are transitioned to the school system, i.e. the first transition. The second transition occurs when a student finishes high school or secondary education, either upon high school graduation with a high school diploma, or at the age of 22, meaning at the completion of their 21st year of life. And those responsibilities go back to the state-funded agencies, and that child is no longer receiving services in the school. So that is the difference between the first and the second transition. What are transition services? Transition services are mandated by IDEA, which is the same law that provides you with the IEP. The transition services begin at the age of 16 in all states. Now, there are some states that are mandated for transition services to begin at 14, which is really smart, especially if your child is going to have a high school diploma and finish his services at the end of 12th grade. Why? Because all kids need to begin to have a conversation about transition services. We don't call it for a typical kid transitional services, but all kids entering 9th grade begin with the concept of, how do I go from school, high school, to a college or vocational school or jobs? And that's when the counselor sits down with your child, who is typical, let's say, and goes through that process. Well, IDEA has created that ability as well. If your child is between the ages of 14 and 16, and you believe that your child should finish their school experience at the end of 12th grade, whatever that age is, now sometimes it's closer to 19, then their ITP, their transition plan, their individual transition plan, which is what the ITP is, should begin by age 14. And that is a decision that can be made by the team. The team will encompass the teachers, the school person, and certainly you as a parent. So just to recap and make sure that I didn't confuse anyone, the ITP must begin by law by age 16, but if your child is 14, or going to be 14 and going to go to high school and graduate at 12th grade, then their ITP should be in effect by age 14. And some states begin automatically by age 14, and it's just a matter of Googling it, and it's pretty easy to find out. Okay, so really transition is really so much more than what is is done in the schools. The first transition that it's so much more. It's what occurs in the school, and it is also what occurs at home. There are legal matters that have to be taken into consideration, medical, financial. There are government programs that occur after the age of 22 or after high school graduation that are funded by the state that that help in that situation. I actually created a checklist for parents to navigate this process. If you haven't if you don't have it yet and you'd like it, it's available on my website, claudiacares.com, and you can just download it from there. It's free, no strings attached. I really just created it because I had so many questions about, what do I need to do? What do I need to do? And I just wanted to consolidate it and offer that to you. So feel free to go and get it, claudiacares.com. I will also be sending you an email after this with it. So if you didn't write it down, don't worry about it. You'll get it in an email. So the part of the IEP that addresses the transition is called the Individual Transition Plan, the ITP. Lots of letters, right? We've got IEP, ITP, IPP, ISP. There's a lot. I get it. And it's like an alphabet soup, really. But the one that we're talking about today is called the ITP, the Individual Transition Plan. It is part of the IEP, and you will find it in your child's IEP. It's usually towards the back. And if your child is 16 years old, and even if you've never heard of this before or don't remember, it is in the back of your IEP. So what is the definition of transition services? This is the definition that is provided by the IDEA, the law that says that we must have transition services, is that the ITP must be a result-oriented process. It must focus on improving academic and functional achievement, and it must facilitate movement from school to post-school activities. I want to give you an example. I reviewed an ITP for one of my clients, and in that ITP, it indicated that the goal was for this particular individual to be a pilot, an airline pilot. Great goal. It really isn't result-oriented. It really doesn't improve on focusing his academic or functional achievement, and it really doesn't help any facilitation from school to post-school activities. I'm not saying you can't have that goal or that dream. You have to go back and see, can he do it? But what we really need to see in that ITP and in the goals is some result-oriented. For example, improve his reading. Learn about what the job entails and how you can get to it. Go and visit a school that helps you become a pilot. In any case, there's a lot of steps in between being 16 years old and being an airline pilot. So again, that goal was not result-oriented or any of those other things. What is included in transition services? It must include post-secondary education goals. It must include integrated employment goals. It could address continuing an adult education for your child. And it could include independent living and community participation. So these are the areas that are part of that ITP and will be part of the goals. Again, the goals have to make sense. So if your child, for example, I had another individual I worked with, he wanted to go to college. Well, it's a great idea. And this particular individual really could go to college, but he had no idea what it meant to go to college. And let's look at it from his point of view. He was in elementary school, then he went to junior high, then he went to high school, then you go to college. What college looks like, he didn't know. He didn't know how you apply. He did not know what classes he needed to take. He didn't know what grades he needed in his classes to be able to attend the college that he wanted to attend. The goals weren't set up. So I'm kind of getting ahead of myself here, but in this particular case, the school district had to pay for a private transition assessment to help create a proper plan to help him actually meet his goals. But the original one that I reviewed did not have that. So what services are based on? They really are based on the child's need. They're not based on what the school has or what the school thinks the child should get. It's really the child's needs. And so you have to start talking about your child's strengths. You have to talk about child's preferences and child's interests. A lot of schools do these assessments. The assessment precedes the transition plan, and they'll give one checklist and they'll decide. That's how my student that I worked with became a pilot. They asked him what he wanted to be, and he checked off pilot. So that was not honestly based on his strengths, or it was based on his preferences and his interests for sure, but not based on his strength. He was reading on a second grade level at 16 years old. It would have been hard for him to become a pilot, at least without catching up on his reading, if that was possible. So I mentioned a little bit about the transition assessment. Transition assessments are often overlooked. A rigorous assessment can help set the direction and identify the goals that would help a student achieve his goals. The assessment needs to be in the area of education and training and employment and when appropriate living skills. For example, the reason it's that when appropriate, some individuals really don't need that addressed in the transition assessment. You know, they can handle most of their independent skills, and so that's not an issue. A transition assessment needs to be done yearly. A lot of times it's done right before 16, one checklist, never again. Well, kids change, all kids change. We change, so why not? Let's be honest, we want a transition assessment as they are growing, especially if you're going to do an assessment at 15, it's not going to look the same for a 20-year-old. So that's really quite important as well. IEP meeting. It's really, really important to mention that you do not have to have your ITP meeting at the same time as the IEP. A lot of families, the reason that they don't really understand the ITP and are not focusing on it is that it comes at the end. These IEP marathon meetings are 2 hours, 3 hours, 4 hours. And then when you're finally agreeing on some of the goals and some of the services, in comes in the ITP, and everybody just checks it off and moves on and didn't even realize that they had an ITP. It is really okay. I highly recommend that a request be made that an ITP be separate. It is separate. It does go in conjunction with the IEP. You know, if you want some reading goals, for example, that's going to go back into the IEP goals, and they're going to make sense, and they're going to go in conjunction. But you still going to want an ITP that is separate. And unless it's a very simplistic situation for you and your child, it is really better to have that separated. An IEP meeting. So once the ITP becomes something that is being worked on and your child is 16 years old, they are by law required to be invited to the meeting. It is mandated. They do send a letter, but a lot of times they really don't follow up and make sure that the student is there. I had a student who was invited. The parent wanted him. We certainly wanted him there to start being part of the process. Didn't show up until it was almost over because they didn't get it coordinated right. So I'm going to talk a little bit more later about self-advocacy and self-determination. Some states call it self-direction. But for an individual to have self-advocacy and to have self-direction, they need to know what's going on. And that is why that student really does need to be an ITP. Now, certainly some of you may have children that's not appropriate. And of course, I'm not talking about students where coming to a meeting would be a hardship for them or would not work for them. But if you do have a child that could begin participating, I highly recommend it and to be a part of the process. And there's something called transfer of rights. Once your child is 18 years old, he will be the one making decisions about his education and post-high school life. And therefore, he will be invited. That's just part of the law that has to be there. If your child is going to, if you're going to ask for limited conservatorship, some states called it guardianship. This should be your, the first sign that you need to go start thinking about that, so that you are able to continue making decision for your child when they turn 18. But they will get this letter, so don't be surprised. And that is regardless of their ability or disability or anything like that. Okay. And there's something called Summary of Performance, the SOP. It is often really overlooked, even more than the ITP, honestly, and really quite impossible to get once your child is no longer in the system. So it basically, what it is that the school is supposed to put together all the information and the data in one document, and includes recommendations of the best way to help your child meet his post-secondary goals. This is going to be really important in terms of if your child is going to go receive post-secondary education, or if your child is going to receive, is going to have a job, because there may be some information there that could really help in terms of the agency supporting your child. So that should be done at the end, before school ends. And again, if your child leaves school and already has a high school diploma, or is 22 and received the certificate of completion, it's going to be really hard to go back and get that. So if you're still in the school system, you definitely want that now, or remember that you need it before the end of school. I now finished the portion about what can be done at school. I'm going to go a little bit into what can you do at home? What does home look like? In an effort to help children focus on learning academics or getting a household moving, many parents have taken over some of their children's ADLs, such as helping them get dressed, or choosing their clothing for them so that they're dressed appropriately, or making sure that they're ready for school or activities, keeping their schedules. These are things that we all do for our children, but it often, when someone has a child with disabilities, it goes into their teens. And really, when we want to start thinking about transitioning our child to adulthood, we want to start focusing on helping our children manage their daily life as independently as they can be. These skills and the desires of what they should be need to change based on who your child is and what their expected ability and independence that they can have. And I want to give you an example of a skill or an issue that often comes up for some individuals. It's something called prompt dependency. It basically it talks about somebody who's dependent on receiving a prompt. I was working with a family who has a daughter, let's call her Susie just to simplify it. And she was able to prepare her own meals. She was pretty good at that. And unfortunately, though, she did not know how to ask for her food and needed support in how to get that food. And it made sense that she would ask her family for support to get the food, but as she was getting older, that didn't make any sense. And so we worked with the family on how to help this young adult. She was approaching adulthood, how to get her own food when she was hungry rather than waiting to be asked. It took us a while to get that dependency to be removed, but we did succeed. So these are things that one could work on with their child to help them reduce that dependency in the home. Here are a number of different areas that can be addressed in the home. Some of them can be addressed at school as well, but some of them can be addressed at home. For example, hygiene, meal preparation, shopping and marketing, safety, laundry, money management, daily routines, and so forth. These are areas that can be addressed at home. You know, the first step would be to assess your child and their goals. If you're getting ABA at home, or if you're not getting ABA, this may be a time to restart it, and have an assessment done to see where your child is and can they do more than what they are doing. It's not a question of getting everyone to be perfect in any of these things. It's a question of, can we help them become more independent and self-sufficient in these goals? In my practice, I provide parenting. I work directly with parents, but not with the children. So it's a parenting issue. For example, it is so much easier. I mean, a really simple example. It is so much easier to take your child's laundry, throw it in the basket, and wash it for them, and then give it back to them and put it away. Is there a step along any of that that your child could participate in? Again, the more they do, the more independent that they are, the more self-sufficient they are, the better their outcome as adults will be. And I don't mean that, I want to be clear, I don't mean that all kids have to do their own laundry. I just mean that the more independent that someone can be in any of the steps along that way, the better their life outcome looks like. One of the areas that I really want to talk about is behavior. Is your child able to express frustrations in a manner for his communication skills? Sometimes they're frustrated and they're throwing tantrums or throwing things, or they're aggressive, but can they do better based on the communication skills that they have? Do they need more communication skills? Do they need something else? A lot of times, by the time kids become teenagers or young adults, you've sort of learned how to handle it, or you've accepted where they are, but this may be a good time to move forward and reevaluate these things. Because the better their behavior is, the better their chances are being able to succeed in an education that's outside of school, or in transition programs that are outside once they finish secondary education. So this is also an area where ABA can be particularly helpful. I know a lot of people have negative experiences or difficult experiences with ABA when their kids were younger. ABA is constantly changing, and finding the right practitioner is important. Not all of them are the same, but it really, the science of it could be really very helpful. Self-advocacy. So self-advocacy is really important. It's not only learning about how to speak up for yourself, but it's also being able to make decisions in your own life. And many behaviors in adults, and probably even children, occur due to not being able to communicate one's need or not being heard. So does your child have any self-advocacy skills? Is he accustomed to being heard? Does he have that opportunity to practice at home? Can he say what he wants, even within his limited ability or greater ability? So this is really important. I had a client I worked with. She was an adult. She was already in her 20s. She did have ability to communicate vocally. She did have some language. However, she wasn't heard. And that's where, you know, when she didn't want to do something and she said no, and her mom wanted her to do it anyways, she would throw a tantrum. She became very aggressive. She would hit, she would throw things, and she was working with her staff. And this was the only way that she was being heard. So it's really important to start looking at your child and see, is he telling me something, and what is he saying? And using that as a springboard to help them advocate for themselves. Because they will need to be able to do that to some extent, and will need to be heard as adults to set up their own life, even if with support. I want to talk a little bit about something called self-determination. It's a big buzzword, at least here in California. We even have a whole program called Self-Determination Program. In some states, it's called Self-Direction Program. But basically, self-direction, it goes hand in hand with self-determination goes hand in hand with self-advocacy. Self-determination includes self-awareness, assertiveness, and the ability to problem solve. It does include understanding one's strengths and the ability to identify when one needs support. If your child's not able to identify where he needs help, how can he ask for help? And self-determination, by the way, should be something that is part of the transition plan in school. Schools have to help kids learn what can they do, what are they good at, what do they need support in. If the schools are teaching that, then your child is able to go back when they are adults and ask their employer for help when they need it. Or if they are getting, they are going to community colleges or four-year colleges, they need to be able to know where to get help and how to get help. Self-determination is really important, and it can be practiced at home in little ways. And so that is really very important. Sexuality is a very touchy subject, and it really is it's very individual to people's values and cultures. I'm not going to go into it too much right now, but it is something that should be addressed with some children. I understand that some you wouldn't, but even a child that is more impacted by their disability, they need to be able to learn how to protect themselves to some degree, if at all possible, so that they can be safe as an adult. So it is something that needs to be addressed, and starting early does help. And you would just do it in bite-sized pieces along the way is what I would mostly recommend. That's all I'm going to say about today, but I do want to make sure people have it. It's a hard one. I admit it's really a tough one for a lot of families. Legal. There are legal considerations. For example, limited conservatorship or guardianship. You want this to be placed at 18 years of age. It's something that you want to address probably in the 6 months leading before 18 years old. Limited conservatorship are 7 different powers. You don't actually necessarily have to have all of them, but it is something that one wants to look into. It protects your child. It doesn't take away their rights. As an adult, they still have many rights, even if they have all 7 powers are part of the limited conservatorship. For example, they could still vote. It is something to look into. I'm not going to go more into it today, but it is something to really address prior to turning 18 years old. Much easier. There are legal and financial implications once your child turns 18. There are things called special needs trusts or pooled special needs trusts that you may want to look into. It protects your child's money. That's why it's financial. It also can protect your child legally. So this is, it's both sides of the coin here. Your child can register to vote at 18. So you can help them if they're able to vote and exercise that right. This one is really important. At age 18, your male child must register with selective services regardless of their disability, unless they are living in a long-term facility. You may say, hey, my child can't, be in the Army or the Navy or what have you. You still want to register them. If you do not register them by age 26, some government assistance like SSI or Medicaid can be affected if your child is not registered. And funny enough, it's actually a felony not to register. So it's a pretty simple process. You could do it online, but you want to do it by 18 years old. Government-funded services. So all states have government-funded services. They're called different things in different states. Again, they are the funding comes from federal money mostly. So your state may have different names for it, but most cities and states have transportation services. Again, applying before they're 18, when you could sign everything and speak for your child, makes it a lot easier. even if you don't think your child is going to use the service ever, it's still helpful to get it before 18. If you are not already receiving state's developmental disability agency services, in California, that's regional centers. There's about 12 states that use that. Different states use different terminology for it. Much easier to register before 18, again, because you could sign, you could speak for your child. You can provide a lot of information at that time. There's also state vocational rehabilitation services. There's a big push to helping individuals with disability work. They should be a part of the process in your ITP and your IEP meeting, especially towards the last year when your child is actually making that big transition from school services to adult services. The state vocational rehabilitation services, for those of you here in California, we call the Department of Rehab, DOR. You could just, if you want to know the name of your state agency, if you Google vocational rehabilitation services and your state name, your state, they'll pop up and be right there. So it's not that hard. There are states that have respite and support services. Not all of them do. Again, California has one. It's called in-home support services. All you need to do is Google family support, respite, your state agency, and check it out. Your child will become eligible for these services at 18 years old, even if he was not eligible before 18, because it is based on their income and not yours. And so that is worthwhile. Always easier to qualify before 18. So I highly recommend taking care of it beforehand. Financial planning. There are many financial considerations when you have a child with disabilities, and it really does not get simpler when they are adults. I'm really sorry to say. I wish I could, say something different here. I know many of you have had many years of putting this together and learning the system, and it just gets more complicated, honestly. You want to open an ABLE account if you haven't. Certainly if you're going to get SSI, you want it because you have a limit of $2,000 allowed in your checking. An ABLE account allows you to put some of the money in there to save it for later on. You want to apply for Social Security benefits by age 18. If the benefit is not already provided, again, it's based on your child's income when they turn 18. Same is true for in-home health supported services, IHSS. So if your child didn't qualify or you didn't qualify before 18, you will certainly qualify afterwards because it's based on their need. Well, you may qualify, depending on your child's situation. There are some medical considerations to take into place. Health insurance, certainly with Obamacare, if that continues, your child can be on it till 26, but you can also qualify for Medicare through SSA or Medicaid through SSI. In California, dental insurance or dental care can be provided through the regional center. Other states may have other ability to do that as well. If you do not have limited conservatorship or it's not appropriate or guardianship for your child, you may want to look into advanced health care directive so that if someone needs to make health decisions for your child, you can do it. And you may want to find out if your doctors who are providing medical care to your child right now, if they will continue after the age of 21. Some doctors can't based on their agreement with the medical insurance that they're providing services under. If they can't, you would much rather know that at around 20 and begin a slow transition of getting to know and looking into new doctors. And then, just some other areas to consider. I'm not going to go deeply into that, but you want to look into future living conditions options. Does your state provide group homes, supported living, independent living, family home agencies, intermittent care facilities, foster family agencies? These are different options for an individual not to continue living in their own home. Many of you have young children, they're still in their teens, you're wondering, oh, they're gonna live with me forever. Remember in the beginning I talked about in the ITP, one of the questions is independent living. It can be addressed. I have had clients who help their child move out somewhere around the age of 20 to their own place using supported living services before they finish their secondary education, because everything is stable. They are in a good environment. They're protective environment. They have a program from 8:30, 8 o'clock, not now with COVID, of course, but everything is stable. And then they graduate or get their certificate of completion because it was 22, and then they look for adult programs. So you don't have to wait. It's very again, dependent on you, your family, your needs, and so forth, but it's something to at least begin to explore. There's also all sorts of different vocational employment and day programs that are available for adults. It's a good time to explore in the year or two prior to the end of your child finishing high school, either 12th grade or again at age 22 or in between. You don't have to stay till 22. That's another conversation. I've listed some programs here. Again, the names of them are probably more California centered, but they are all funded by Medicaid funds. So a lot of other states are going to have similar programs. There are post-secondary education options. I've listed a few of them here. Again, you want to explore them, especially when you're talking about doing an ITP, because where you are heading helps you prepare in high school. And that's why the transition program in the school is so important. If your state doesn't provide self-determination program or self-direction program, it is something to look into. And does your child have a circle of support? Are you the only one making those decisions? As they become adults, having a larger circle of support, maybe a neighbor, maybe a good friend, maybe a cousin who's taken interest in your child, and bringing them into that circle of support so that as your child becomes an adult, there are more people in his life who are helping him make those or her make those decisions. And finally, what is really important is person-centered planning is a concept that is receiving really increasing notice and is the hallmark actually of the self-determination program and self-direction program. Is that the idea that the focus is on the total person and we need to recognize their desires and their interests. And again, the ITP, the individual transition plan, the transition assessment should be person-centered. It should look at the individual child, what he wants, if possible, or what his circle of support would like for him, and what will help him achieve his or their family's goal. Whenever possible, it's good to involve your child in this. They are much more likely to participate in achieving those goals. In the beginning, I told you a little story about a young man that I was helping with who wanted to go to college, had no idea what he needed to do. Well, he wasn't really doing his homework. He really wasn't doing his work to help him get to college. He didn't realize that was important. No one taught it to him. Well, if we involve the child in his goals, he is much more likely to work on them. And this has been about a year ago, and I just received a report that school is really, he's taking school seriously. He now knows how it's going to help him achieve his goals and why those grades matter. So it is important. So what is the next educational step for you? If your child is 16 years old or above, check your IEP. Look towards the back for that IEP. Feel free to really schedule a complimentary appointment. I'm happy to review it with you. Get a copy of it, scan it, ask the school for a PDF, email me, let's set up a time. I'm happy, it's complimentary. I've done this before. Sometimes people have to go and turn around and request certain things from the school. I've had one client who ended up having to hire an advocate to get a new assessment done, because the one that was done in the IETP was just abysmal. So please don't hesitate. I'm happy to do it. If your child is 15 years old and has an IEP coming up, take a look. And as you have to get a notice saying what the assessments, look to see what assessments are for the transition plan. If there isn't a good assessment, ask about it. You can maybe get a good assessment done by the school without having to fight for it, for a private one through the IE process. If your child is 13 to 16 and will be graduating at the end of 12th grade and they do not have an ITP, ask for transition assessment, ask for an ITP. If you're not quite sure, that's a little trickier. Please feel free to schedule a complimentary appointment with me. I'll help you out. That's what I'm here for. I am going to be creating, well, let's talk a little bit about what you can do at home. You can access your ABA if you don't have it. You can access your insurance. Most medical insurance have it. If your medical insurance does not provide it and you have a denial, your state needs to provide it, and you can get an assessment. I am going to be creating some parenting groups, helping, like a small group with probably some one-on-one components to it. If you're interested in it, keep an eye. I'll be emailing about signing up for this. Or if you want one-on-one sessions, of course, I'm available for that as well. Thank you for joining me today. If you want more information, I can be contacted at Claudia Cares Consulting. Actually, my website is claudiacares.com and my email is consulting@claudiacares.com. I am happy to take some questions now. I'm taking a look here. If you have any questions, please feel free to put them in the chat. I'm available for a little while here. I give you a moment. I'm happy if anyone has any questions. Do you do independent transition plan? Yes, I do them. Well, what I do is a transition assessment. The independent transition plan is done by the school. The independent transition assessment is done by the school. If they haven't done a good job, then you go back to the school, complain, so to speak, with an advocate, with a lawyer or individual on your own, and you request for a transition assessment through what is called the IEE process, and they have to pay for it, and I do that. I'm looking to see any other questions. You're welcome. Thank you for coming. Okay, looks like I answered all the questions in my presentation. Yeah, a lot of information to think about. You're right. Feel free to reach out to me if you have any questions afterwards. I will have a recording of this on my Facebook page, Transitioning to Adulthood for Children with Special Needs. If you're not already a part of it, feel free to join. No cost. You're free to ask questions on it. And I'm happy to help out. Yes, I will give you my phone. Somebody here asked for my phone number. Hold on, I did a typo, 1 second. And I'm also going to provide you with my email. Okay. Feel free to reach out to me. I'm here. I'd love to help out. And if there are no other questions, I think we will finish. So anyone else? Just checking. I want to give you a moment. I don't want to close off if anyone has any questions. So yeah, this is a lot of information, and trying to provide it quickly is hard. So feel free to download my checklist. It's on my website. If you go at the upper right-hand corners, it says checklist, get your checklist here. And if you fill out your information, it'll be there. I will also be sending you a follow-up email, and I'll put the link on that as well. So if you're not catching it, then you will have it then. Anyways, I think that if there are no more questions, I'm going to go ahead and end our meeting for today. Thank you so much for coming. Really appreciate it. Have a great day. All right. Bye-bye.